Good afternoon and welcome to our stamp club. Hopefully my computer will cooperate this week and not completely lose its mind, lose its connectivity to the internet, and decide that it just needs a break. And today what we're going to do is make a really, really cool card, primarily the one on the left. This is a 2-for-1 though, because the pieces that we're going to get when we make this card are going to be used to make the second card. And I want to give credit to Brandy Cox from the Creative 8 team. She is a demonstrator in North Carolina, and recently she showed a project that is very similar to the way the one on the left is constructed. I did do a couple little tweaky things just to make sure I wasn't copying her absolutely. But it is a really fun card that opens up and gives 3 different views of some beautiful designer series paper and also a really nice sentiment. So I'm going to show you how to make this kind of card. I'm going to use different paper though. And the reason I'm using different paper is I ran out of this particular pattern because I love this designer series paper so much. But I will use another piece and show you how to do it. And as I mentioned, the extra pieces, the die cuts that you get from this card, I just turned into a really simple, but I think a really pretty card. Nice layers, and we're going to do that one as well. The best way to do this is literally to just jump in. And I'm going to change colors completely because I needed to find a cardstock that I could use with the paper I have left over from the designer series paper that I used to make my example card. So let me bring the example card back in. The paper I'm going to use today is this pattern. And all of these gorgeous patterns, you can see I've used it quite a bit because I have a lot of scraps in here. This comes from the Fancy Flora 6x6 designer series paper. This is retiring, which means that you don't have a lot of time. You've got about a week. This was still available when I checked yesterday. And if you're interested in getting it, I strongly recommend that you do, because it will no longer be available pretty soon. And it just has some really, really stunning pieces on both sides. So I decided that I was going to take another piece, actually 2. So you do need 2 pieces of the exact same pattern designer series paper. And it will be obvious in just a minute why. And I chose this color this time. I wanted to do something that was really bright and cheerful. And the color that I am going to use on my cardstock is Night of Navy. And you can see the Night of Navy kind of popping out in a couple of places on this design. So for the card, you need to grab 2 pieces of 6x6 designer series paper, the exact same design. I'm going to set that aside. You need a full sheet. Just pretend with me for a minute that this is not cut and scored. It started as a piece of 11 by 8.5. So you need 1 sheet of cardstock. Any color at all. Basic white, basic black works perfectly as well if you don't want to have a color cardstock. You're going to cut it in half on the 11-inch side. So you're going to get 2 pieces that are 5.5 by 8.5. And then for 1 card, you're going to need both of these card bases. So traditionally, when we make an A2 card, we use a card base like this, which when folded is 4.25 by 5.5. To make this card, we're actually going to put these 2 card bases together. Okay, so you're going to get both of these card bases out, and we're going to use those to make the card. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, and the hardest thing for me, is to cut your beautiful designer series paper. And what we need to do is we need to get 2 pieces that are absolutely identical. And here's why. When I open, this is the outside. And see that pattern down on the left bottom right-hand corner. When I open that up, it's the same pattern on the second layer. That's because I used one piece on the top and one piece in the middle. And I needed to make sure that they're layered the same way, that I cut them to the same pattern. I need to cut my designer series paper so it's 4 inches wide by 5 1/4 inches high. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a border all the way around. And I'm going to cut both pieces at the same time. These will work fine if you just kind of stack them and put them into your paper trimmer. The key on this is to figure out where you want to cut your paper. And for this one, I want to make sure that I have all of this design in the upper left-hand corner. And then I can take off a little bit down here and still have plenty of really pretty pattern that's going to show on my card. So I'm going to cut this into my 5 1/4, and I'm going to cut it so that the 5 1/4 actually goes down to where my pinky is, kind of right here. So again, I'm triple checking that I have the same pattern going the same way. Just going to stack those together, and I'm going to put them into my paper trimmer, and I'm going to bring them over to 5 1/4. And I'm positioning that so I'm going to end up with a really pretty pattern up at the top and some really pretty pattern down at the bottom. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut that. And both of those pieces are going to come out clean. Save this. You never know what you can use this little piece of paper for. So now what we need to do is kind of stack that again. And this time I'm going to cut it at 4. So I've got both of my pieces stacked one on top of each other. And I just cut that. Again, I'm going to have some really pretty scrap that I can add to my never-ending pile of scrap from that designer series paper. And because I had those stacked, I've ended up with 2 pieces that are exactly the same. Right? You can see how the patterns are the same. So what we're going to do with that, we're going to use one of them. So I'm going to put one to the side, and we're going to start with one of the pieces that we cut out. And we're going to look at our card base, which is going to end up being 2 pieces that will be adhered together. This is where you have a choice, and you can choose to have the front of your card open from left to right, or you can choose to have the front of your card open from right to left. I don't know why, but to me, it makes more sense right to left, kind of like a book. So I'm going to have my card open like this. And let me show you on the example card what that's going to mean. The front is going to open like a book. Then that middle panel is going to open in the opposite direction. And last, you're going to have the piece that's in the center. We are going to start with the outside panel. So that means you can get rid of one of your card bases. And we're going to use a card base and a piece that we have cut. And I'm just going to open this so that I have my piece laying flat, because eventually I'm going to put this through a die cutting machine. And what I want to do is I want to put my piece of designer series paper, and I can actually fold this just so you can see it a little bit better on the background piece of paper that I have here. I want to adhere this to the front of my card. Because I am going to die cut it, if you look at this, I'm going to die cut that piece. So that means I really should only put glue on the edges of that piece of paper, not a lot in the middle. I'm going to use the pieces that get cut out from the middle for a different project. So I'm going to just glue. I'm going to use some Tombow, and I'm just going to put a layer, very thin line on each side. And this will be plenty to make sure that that piece is going to adhere to the front of the card. And then I will just do my best to get that centered. Try to get it so that I have equal framing on all four sides. Give it a little burnish with my finger. And then I'm going to decide what die I want to use. And this is where you have a lot of choices. You can use squares, rectangles, circles, triangles, anything that you have that has concentric shapes. And I am going to use some of the dies from the rectangle stitched framelits. I do have to confess to you, I cried. I cried when I found out that these are retiring because I use these all the time. They're fabulous. And if you haven't added them to your collection, consider it. They are still available and they're just absolutely amazing. Whatever shape you choose for your dies, you're going to need two. One is going to be used to cut the frame on the outer layer. Again, looking at the example. So cutting the frame on the first piece. The second is going to be used to cut the frame on the middle piece. And the size of the dies need to be concentric. You need to use the larger on the outside and a slightly smaller one on the inside. The die that I am using on the outside, if you choose to use the stitched rectangle, is the third largest. I wanted to just give it a little bit of a frame on the outside. The one that I'm going to use on the middle is the fifth largest. It's not the one that is, there's one that's in between these two, and I wanted a little bit more of a border. So we've all done die cutting before. This is not mystical or magical. You're going to do your best to put this in the middle of your designer series paper and tack it down. I strongly recommend that you do tack this down, even if you have a magnetic plate, because you want to do your best to get this pretty squared off when you put it through your die cutting machine. And a couple of things that you can use, a couple of options to hold your dies down. You can see here that I have Post-it notes. I've just got this little stack of Post-it notes. The tack on the Post-it note is really nice because even though the designer series paper is thin, you're going to have a little bit more resistance when you push this through your die cutting machine, and it may press the Post-it in a little stronger than what you normally would do. So put something on that, and then just as you normally would, put that on your die cutting machine. And one little tip is when you have a straight edge die like this, try to move it a little off center, meaning don't have it going straight through your machine. That can cause a little bit of tension when you're running it through. If you can just turn that straight edge a little bit and run it through, your machine will be a little bit happier. So in other words, don't put it straight through like this, just tilt it a little bit, and that will give your machine a little bit of a help in getting that die through. So from the magic of television, this is what you're going to end up with. You will have a piece that will obviously have a die cut, and then you're going to have two pieces that will come out from the center. And you'll have two because you did not put glue behind the middle part of your designer series paper. So this is where I'm going to end up after I've put that piece through my die cutting machine. And like I said, be sure that you do not get rid of these two pieces, because what we're going to end up doing with those is they're going to be the foundation for a card that will look like this. This will be our 2-for when we use that on the second card that we're going to make. Okay. So that's the front of your card. I'm just going to put that piece to the side and just bear with me for a minute while I get some of my supplies out of the way so that I can make sure that we are on track here. Okay, so we have our beginning of the card. The next thing that we will be doing is we're going to work on that second die cut. And we're actually going to use that first die cut as a guide when we do that. And again, I'll bring in the example, and you'll see that the paper is lined up in terms of the image on the first and on the second. So that was partially because we cut the paper at the same time. And it's also going to be because of the way that we're going to put this card together. So I've got the front, and now I have my other piece of cardstock, and I'm going to put that, going to kind of dry fit it, meaning I'm not going to glue this. We are not going to glue these two pieces together just yet. But what we are going to do is put them together to kind of fit them and just see how the card is going to work. And really what you're doing is you're opening up the card base that we just worked on, and you're going to put the entire card base, the second card base, inside, but it's going to open in the opposite direction because eventually we're going to glue these two together. So if you put them together and have the second piece closing in the opposite way, what we're going to do is we're going to take that second piece of cardstock that we cut out, and we're going to dry fit this for a second. Excuse me. We're just going to put that inside the card, and we're going to fold it over. And you can see, because we intentionally cut it the same way, that the pattern lines up. So we can unravel that front part, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to glue down this second piece, kind of like we did the first. And just do a double check when you're doing this. Just kind of make sure that you've got those two pieces together. Just like you did on that first piece, only put adhesive on the sides, not in the middle. You're going to end up with some extra pieces of die cut with a piece of cardstock and a piece of designer series paper. But just put adhesive on the outside. And I'm going to stand up. This is the best way for me to get a really good view of what I'm doing here. And I'm going to just glue down. I'm going to triple check that I've got the paper in the right orientation, which I do. And I am just going to glue that paper again as best as I can in the center of my second card. And I'll give that a good burnish. And then when I close that up, my two patterns are aligning. Now, if I were to bring this close to the camera, you might see, and I'm not going to look for it, you might see that there's some patterns that don't align perfectly. Let it go. No one's going to notice. I promise. No one is going to see that. And then what you're going to want to do is, while you have that first piece closed, take the smaller die that you want to use and just put that in the middle. You can use the die cut that you have from the outside as a visual guide. Have your Post-it notes kind of handy when you're doing this. And just kind of hold it down. Open that up. I'm going to use the same Post-it note because it still has tack on it. And I'm just going to hold that rectangle down. I can scooch out that middle card. And I know this is obvious, but I do want to make sure that it is one layer. So you're going to open up that card. And then you're going to take that piece and put it on your die cutting plate, platform, plate, And on this one, I would do the same thing when I run it through. Just move it a little bit so that you don't have a straight edge going through your die cutting machine. Just angle it a tad and run that through your die cutting machine. And again, through the magic of television, you will end up with a piece that looks like this. Actually, in that orientation. And you're going to, again, have two pieces that will be die cut from what you just did. All right. So at this point, if we get all of the pieces together, this is what we're going to have. We're going to have the outer piece of our card and two pieces that we die cut. Cardstock, designer series paper. Put those to the side. We're going to have our inner card that we're going to, in just a minute, adhere. And from that, we also have two pieces that were die cut. We've got our designer series paper and our cardstock. And now it is at that point where we can glue our two card bases together. And what we're going to do is we're going to put glue on the back of the inner card. And again, you don't need an awful lot. What I suggest is to put it more on the kind of toward the outside edges. I'm going to sort of mimic what I did on the designer series paper when I prepped that to go through the die cutting machine. And that should be fine. You should not need more. And then you are going to put these two pieces together. And because I'm using Tombow, I have a little bit of grace. Make sure before you commit that you can fold the front card. You don't want to tuck this piece up so close to where you've got that score line that it's going to be difficult to fold both sides of the card. And then go ahead and give that a good burnish. All right, so now we've pretty much got the base of our card. We've got the outer layer, the inner layer, and then the back of our card. This is where you have some options, and this is where I want to bring in the example, and I'm going to show you the example, and I'm going to do something a little different on this card. So when I did the example card, a couple of things are different. One is that the cardstock is a heck of a lot lighter in color than navy blue. So when I open up this card, I still have a background where I could write my message. Or if I don't want to write it on the inside, I can write it on the back. But still, this crumb cake is a nice color to write on. We're not going to be dealing with that necessarily with Night of Navy. It's a little dark. I don't know that I could really write on this that well. So if you want, you can always put in a piece of white cardstock here, and this can be for your message. Or if you don't want to put the message on the inside, you can always put the white cardstock on the back. And I just cut this piece of white to be 4 inches by 5 1/4. So 4 by 5 1/4. And I'm going to, in this case, on this card, I'm going to go ahead and put that in the middle in the back. So it's going to be just a smidge different than the card that I showed as an example. And I'm also going to talk about another option that you're going to have in a second. And it's really going to depend on what you want to do with your card. And let me just get this down and I'll show you what I mean. So again, I'm just going to do the best I can to get this in the center. And I'm going to use this for 2 purposes. This will be where I put my sentiment, but I'm also going to continue to do a little bit more decorating. on the card. So we have pieces left over from what we cut. And let's go ahead and bring those back in. We have 4 pieces. We have the 2 larger from the front. We have the 2 smaller from the middle. Like I said, I'm going to use these 2 on a completely separate card, but I wanted to bring them out to make sure that I knew which was which. So this I'm just going to put to the side for now. Now I've got these 2 pieces, and quite frankly, this piece, this cardstock, is extra in this case. If you have used a light piece of cardstock like I did on that first card, you might want to pretend this is the crumb cake piece. I actually used the equivalent crumb cake piece to stamp my greeting and then to die cut it, because this is extra. So if you used a light color of cardstock for your background, you may want to consider using that small cardstock piece that you have from the second die cut to use for your sentiment if you want to. You also have a choice on the second piece of cut designer series paper. And what I can do with this, if I want to, is I can actually layer that right in the middle, and I can tack it down, and it's going to be in the center on the inside. If you don't want to do that, if you want to leave, in this case, maybe a white background, and you want to build that up with a sentiment, with something else, and leave it a little more clean, that's an option. So you can leave it like this and maybe put your sentiment in the middle, dress it up a little bit. You can add the designer series paper in the middle. I'm going to do that. I kind of like that. And this is where the design differs just a little bit from what Brandy had shared. Brandy did a lot of scene building where she took different die cuts and built like a scene with seashells and with flowers, and it's absolutely stunning. I was maybe a little lazy, thinking that I would just take paper that I already have and make that into my card. So if you want to do what I did, simply open your card so the front is completely open and you have that second piece that is laying flat, and put a little bit of adhesive on the back of that small die cut piece. And we're going to use this as a puzzle piece because the die cut is going to fit perfectly since it came from the same piece of paper to start with. We're just going to put it back where it went. And the only thing I caution you on is before you commit, make sure you have it oriented in the right direction. So make sure that that pattern is in the right place. You don't want to put this upside down. And just kind of tuck it. You'll feel when it doesn't move, it's like a little stopper. So you're going to tuck it over and just make sure it fits really well and give that a nice little press. And then you're going to have the complete design. I thought that was kind of cool because it makes sure that the entire design is seen from the front, and then you kind of get layers that are taken away when you open the card. So that's what I did on this one as well. To finish off the card, what I ended up doing was I used one of the sentiments from Something Fancy. That is a stamp set that is carrying over into the new annual catalog. I love the sentiments and the font on this, and I used the Happy Birthday. I chose a color that complemented the colors in the designer series paper, and for me that meant using Calypso Coral. It's one of the colors in this designer series paper. And then I chose one of the dies from the Something Fancy dies. These correspond with the stamp set. They're super fun as well. Very, very useful. And I wanted to have a sentiment that actually would fit in between the size of the smaller die. And that meant a little surgical work, because if I were to use the piece that I die cut, it would actually go a little bit further than the size of the window. So I just got my snips out and just cut off the end of that die to make the piece more of a rectangle. So it will fit in here without any problem whatsoever. And then I wanted to give it a little bit of a pop, literally a little bit of a pop. And if you're like me, you do not waste dimensionals. These are some that I have from the mini dimensionals. And make sure that you use the edges. They work really well. And you definitely don't want to throw them out, because they will feel the need for the dimensional. And also when you do this, make sure that you put a dimensional or two in the middle. You don't want it to sag. And I'm just going to find a place that doesn't have a lot of pattern. There's kind of a break between those pool party flowers. So I'm going to do my best to get that kind of centered. I'm not going to press it down until I'm happy with where it is. And because it is less than the width of that inner die cut, it's going to close without a problem. And then I just used a couple of cute little gems to finish my card off. These are some that are retiring. And again, I cried. I don't have them out, but the champagne rhinestones are retiring. That really, I don't know. I don't know why they're retiring. I have to get more because I have been using a lot of them, although I don't have them on this card. And I'm just going to put a couple of nice little jewels that will catch the eye on this cute little card. I'll put that one down there. There we go. Now I could do more, and obviously you can do as much or as little. Just have a little bit of paper on here. You can do as much or as little as you want on this. You could put some twine, you could put some, you could tie ribbon around the edges, but I think it makes just a really pretty card, and it really shows off that designer series paper. Now, what can we do with the other piece? This struck me as just a fun, different kind of card to do. And I just wanted to show you what I did to make this. I took a piece of basic white and I cut that in half on the 11-inch side. So this is 5.5 by 8.5. Scored it at 4 1/4. So I got my A2 card base. And then I cut one more sheet of basic white, and I cut that into 4 pieces. These are each 4 inches wide. You hear a theme here, 4 inches by 5 1/4. And then I put one score line, 1/8 of an inch in on each side, just to give it a little fun, just to have something that kind of made it pop a little bit. And I'm going to use that as my pop on the front. It's white on white, but I think oftentimes we forget about using the same color on our card base. It really, a monochromatic pop with just a little bit of a difference can really be really pretty. So I'm just going to put that piece right on the front. And it kind of gives a false sense of just of layering. So put that right on the front of the card. And then I have these two pieces. And sometimes I think the whole catty corner kind of just whimsical look is really cool. So the first thing I'm going to do is sort of dry fit this, kind of figure out how I want it to look. And do I want the design going this way? Do I want the design going that way? I actually like it better that way for some reason. So I think I'm going to do it that way. And I'm just going to take my cardstock and not overthink this. Just put a little bit of glue on here and go ahead and adhere that piece to the front of the card. Add an angle, a little bit of a wonky angle. I love the word wonky. So just kind of at a little wonky angle. And what I'm doing when I am figuring this out is I'm looking at the corners of the blue. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm looking at that corner is touching the score line. That corner, the opposite corner, is touching the score line. These two are on the outside of the paper, and it just makes it look intentional. So I wanted to kind of get those positioned. And then I'm going to come back in and add this on the top. And again, I'm not overthinking this. I'm just going to go ahead and put that down. And this is a great way when you're making cards and you have leftover pieces, just consider what you can do with them. There usually is a fun way to use a leftover so that it's kind of fun and intentional. And then I have my happy birthday. And on this one, I'm going to do just a little bit of a twist. The other card, I used some linen thread. I will be using linen thread on here, but I'm going to use it a little differently. So I'm going to grab my linen thread. I need to get some more of this as well. I really like it. It's just so useful and pretty. You can also use your blends or your markers, and you can color this. So you can get a really neat color just by adding some ink to the back of or to your linen thread. And let's see if I can tie a bow. Me and bows don't always get along, but I'm going to do my best. And I'm going to use the trick of putting down a glue dot. So I'm going to find where I want my bow to be. And I'm going to stick a glue dot where I want that bow. And then I'm just going to mash, technical word, mash the linen thread into that glue dot. And that becomes my second pair of hands. I'm just going to tie a cute little bow and mash it down again. And then I want one tail over the front and one tail behind. And I'm intentionally going to put the happy birthday a little bit off center, just for something different. Because there's no rule. There's nothing that says I have to have it centered or I have to do it the way that I did the other card. Because doing things differently and having a a different look on the same kind of cards just gives a very appealing change, very appealing feel. All right, so we're going to take those dimensionals again. I also always touch the back just to make sure that I have all of the sticky off. Be good if I have happy birthday the right way up. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of place one tail behind and one tail over the top. And kind of get it straight. We'll see if that's straight enough. That looks pretty good. And then I can kind of move it around. So one on the top, one on the bottom. And then if I want to add a little bit of bling, I can do that as well. So it's just a very, very simple card. But when you add a little bit of pop, I think the rhinestones will help define it a little bit more. And I'll put one more down here to draw the eye to the white. I love the take your pick tool as well, because I like to figure out where I want to put my embellishments, and I can literally just hold that embellishment up and figure out where I want to place it before I commit to putting it down. I don't know, I'm changing my mind. That looks good. All right. So there, I have 2 birthday cards. One from what we did with the die cutting, and one that is pretty much made from the leftover pieces of that die cutting. And you'll see from the example that I started with, that is exactly what I did for these 2. So I invite you to play around with this. You're going to find that there are ways that you like to make these kinds of cards. They are not difficult, and I think they really do give a big wow factor to folks who will receive them. They're very special, they're very beautiful, and I really hope that you enjoy making them. So until next time, Inky hugs.